The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ.
And it's Monday in the Riv, the day of the Iowa caucuses.
That's right. And it's also Super Monday, where nobody goes to work because of the Super Bowl. They need to recover.
17 million people, which is kind of strange because I know there's not 17 million people in Kansas City and in San Francisco. They're large cities, and this is the beginning of the campaign season.
Yes, it is.
Although the campaign season has lasted the entire term of Trump since they began to impeach him before he even got elected, and before he was sworn in. So this will unfortunately continue because politics reigns supreme, not doing the work of the people. So, let's see, fire department's got $1 million public safety funding. Well, that's good. Let's hope they use it.
Well, I spoke about that a little bit on the on the flush, and
I know.
I got some bump back from people in the city, and because they say, I'm attacking the police and fire department. No, I'm not. This is money that's meant for staffing. This is not meant for people to pay overtime. It's time to get our staffing levels up. You've got 18 positions available, I believe, in the police department. Well, if you've got the money, staff it.
Well, you're right, CJ, but they don't want to hear it because I'll tell you why they don't want to hear it. Many years ago, the city made a choice, and then they complain when a few people retire unexpectedly or something happens and then they're severely understaffed. They chose many years ago to understaff and technically not understaff, but not really have optimum staffing. That's a better way of phrasing it. And fill in vacation times and things like that and sick times with overtime.
Right.
Because some bean counter sat down and said, well, you know something? If we fill in with overtime rather than with personnel, it's cheaper than hiring a firefighter. Because we have to pay the firefighters medical, all the other benefits that go along with it. So it's cheaper to pay overtime. But again, it's a false narrative, and it's only seeing the tree, not the forest. Because theoretically, it is cheaper, but maybe not so today. I think I mentioned on a show when I got on the job there were 300 men.
Right.
And then somewhere during that period we went down to 255. And I fought against that reduction to 255, which is a lot more than they've got now. But I was told point blank by the chief at the time and by the city, we'd rather pay overtime than hire, get back to a complement of 298 or 300 because it's cheaper. But ultimately it becomes not cheaper because remember, 20 years of this, salaries have increased greatly. Overtime is a much bigger factor and I don't know if anybody's really crunched the numbers now to see if in fact overtime is less costly than hiring bodies, because I'm going to tell you something. And there are a few people still around that were around during this era. When I got on the fire department, there was virtually no overtime. None. Zero. Nada. The only time you got an overtime is if we had a mill fire and you got called in for a major fire. If you got one overtime a year, you had a good year. If you got two, it was a miracle year. Now they get 10, 15, 20 overtimes for everybody on the job. They have difficulty bringing people in. They get so much overtime that they have to go looking around and calling a whole bunch of people before they finally find someone to come in. So it's no longer the most cost-effective way. And not only that, it's not the best way for public safety. Having more personnel, having better staffing levels is far safer and far better for the general public. When I got on the job with 300 men, we complied with the optimum staffing level. During non-prime time, we had 5 men on virtually every truck in the city, which meant what? If somebody called in sick, you didn't need an overtime because you still had 4 men on a truck, which is in compliance with the NFPA standards, except for high-value areas, which they recommend in 5, but the 1710 standard doesn't. 3 men companies is the most ineffective, and I had all the curves and the efficiency of laying on the line with a 3-man with a 3-man crew, a 4-man crew versus 5-man crew. It's not as it's safer. You have more people. It's more safer even from a standpoint of covering the city. Because let's do the math. When we had 300 men and we had a house fire, they sent 2 engine companies, a ladder company, rescue, and the chief. 2 engines, 5 men, 10 men on the first 2 engines. Ladder truck, 5 men, 15 men. Rescue, heavy rescue, 3 men. 18 men, chief and his aide, 20 men at a fire. Do the math. How many trucks do you need to get 20 with 3 men on a truck? A lot more. So you got 2 engine companies, a ladder. You got fundamentally 1 task force. And you can handle a pretty damn good house fire with that amount of personnel. Today, you got to get 3 pumps right out of the gate. So you get a good working fire, you call for extra help, you fundamentally strip the city. That's why we have to be so dependent on mutual aid. It just doesn't, you're right, CJ, I agree. It should be used to put more bodies on the job. And hopefully they do. And I can't speak to police because I know nothing about the way I know they have a lot more inside jobs and they have vice squads and all this other stuff and major crimes divisions. And so not everybody is in uniform on patrol. But in a fire service, 95% of the personnel are in suppression. They're out there to protect the lives and property of the people. So hopefully they'll bring up the complement with this grant. We'll see what happens. Maybe someday we can get somebody here who's knowledgeable about police to tell them about their manpower. But remember, the police defray a lot of their overtime with money they get from the feds, because they get a lot more federal stuff because of the drugs and stuff and all this other things they get. But the reality is, you're right. You can get some pushback, but I agree with you. And obviously the guys aren't going to complain. They're making a ton of money on overtime.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to complain if you're making a damn big fat bump in your salary because you worked overtime. So they're not going to complain. But from a safety standpoint of not tying up, because you actually have to call trucks, not for the truck. You're not calling another engine company because you need another engine. You're not you need the bodies that are on that truck to give you enough manpower to execute the firefighting operation. Because let's face it, when you get there with a three-man company, you fundamentally got one person. The driver's going to be operating the engine or operating the aerial. Then you have the officer and one firefighter. Now, if that officer helps him pull hose, he's fundamentally not doing his job as an officer. But you have a three-man company, you get two engine companies, a ladder, that's 9 people, rescue's 12, chief and his aide is 2, that's 14 versus 20. The old Manning with 300 men, you actually had 20. So right now to get 20 people, you basically have to get almost 7 trucks. 6 anyway. So you tell me, it allows us to protect Fall River with Fall River firefighters, and it's better also for the work of the men. The men have to do a heck of a lot of manual labor initially at a fire. They got to drag hose. They've got to begin to advance lines. They got to get ladders up. They've got to do a lot of work. Heck of a lot easier as a chief officer to have the personnel to do it. I mean, there have been circumstances at fires where they couldn't do they had to delay an operation which will help control the fire much more rapidly because they didn't have the personnel to execute it. Especially if you're putting up big ladders, because you can't throw them up with 2 people. It's not like your household ladders. So, hey, let's hope they do it. And, I read the flush, and as I always do, and, there's always some kind of pushback, but everybody's got a different perspective. My perspective is based on actually doing the job, doing it under both circumstances, doing it with 4- and 5-man crews for the most part versus 3-man crews. And I can tell you, as someone who worked as part of those crews, as a firefighter, then as a company officer, and as a chief directing the operations, there's no substitute for manpower because firefighting is a labor-intensive operation. It's like having a battle in a war with no soldiers. So it is what it is. Charlie Baker wants to restrict access to birth, death, and marriage certificates.
He's getting a lot of pushback for that.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Well, vital records like birth records and death records are used in academia. They use it for, how many children are born in this specific area, how many people die, what do they die from. There's a lot of research information there. Also, one of the big things now is genealogy research. And he wants to limit birth records that you can't receive them until they're 90 years old. And death records after 50 years. That's going to make genealogy research very difficult. It's also going to make academia have a little bit of problem getting some of their research information.
Well, again, here's another knee-jerk reaction because they're worried about information access. Well,
right.
Secure the information properly, make sure that it's a legitimate case. But as you said, information is what drives many things, including research and everything else, not only genealogy. And I'm sure the criminals are in favor of this because, let's face it, how many criminals have they actually found over the course of the last decade or so because one of their relatives went to find out went to ancestry.com.
Exactly.
You know, and they find out they get a DNA match and trace it back. Well, Charlie, sometimes, you know, I guess you forgot that you were one of those predatory, you were part of that predatory healthcare. And by the way, speaking of that, you got that article I sent you
Yes, I did.
New York. That is a horrifying article.
Yes, it is.
About what the pharmaceutical comes in. I really would like all of our viewers, please. I sent this to some people, but please go to. I'm going to get the exact. I'm going to see if I'm going to get the exact title of this article. I think. The NewYorkTimes.com. How chaos at chain pharmacies is putting patients at risk. Please, when you got a little time on your computer, go to the NewYorkTimes.com and check this article out. It's a very, very long article.
Yeah,
but
it is.
talks about how deaths, errors, even pharmacists are afraid to come out against their companies. And how one pharmacist, I believe, filled over nearly 600 prescriptions during his shift. And all the pharmaceutical errors being made, they start out with some case histories about some, let's see, I'll just quickly, Elisa Watra's medication mix-up meant pounding headaches, nausea, dizziness. A 17-year-old from Connecticut was about to take another asthma pill when she realized she had been given a blood pressure med. Then Edward Walker, 38, lands in the emergency room, where a pharmacy supplied him with ear drops rather than eye drops. And those are the ones that, you know, really, then I'll get the one last one before I go, because this is a very long. Then Mary Sherman, 85, the error was discovered only when she was dying in a Florida hospital, when a pharmacy dispensed a powerful chemotherapy drug instead of an antidepressant. Read the article, and remember, our Congress and Senate does absolutely nothing, not only to reduce the cost of drugs, but to stop these predatory companies. And an article talks about how those places, pharmacies have become fundamentally sweatshops.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about that. And you don't even have pharmacists filling the prescriptions sometimes. You have pharmacy techs. And what happens is the pharmacist is supposed to check that. It's supposed to be a double check. So what I see a lot of times is you see the pharmacist open up the bottle and look at it. But the pharmacies have now instituted some programs to cut these type of errors. You'll see that it says, you know, elongated white tablet or red and white capsule. And that's supposed to offset some of those problems. But it doesn't always, because they're changing their providers of who's providing these drugs all the time.
And they even said in the article that that's crap. They
Right.
say they instituted things, but these errors are being made. You can't fill 600 prescriptions in an 8-hour shift. That's like a prescription every, you know, minute and 15
It's like
seconds.
piecework.
You know, it's piecework.
Yeah.
That's right. And you
It's
can't
like
do
piecework. And, you know, and then when you've got companies buying up insurance companies, when you have companies like CVS Caremark buying up Aetna,
it. Yep.
who is, Aetna, by the way, is a major Medicare Part D provider. And they're telling their people, oh, if you go to CVS, we'll waive your copay for Tier 1 drugs.
Yeah, and they
your Tier
also
2
got
drugs
into
will be
the
$3.
prescription benefit management,
Right.
because that's becoming something. And they talked about how PBMs actually have driven up the prices. Yet, so as soon as CVS finds out there's money to be made at anything associated with drugs, they buy it.
Right.
Like you said, they bought Aetna, They've bought some PBMs, and the article goes into it. Extremely, extremely enlightening article. I urge you all to go and read it. And what do we got now? After months urging the Senate, Taunton Senator lauds the passage of climate change bills. Code word for taxes.
And fees.
And fees. And we have a local city councilor who is supportive of these kinds of things.
Yeah, you know, interestingly enough, you know, when I started looking at this, because I saw right away over the weekend, Trottley came out with this statement that we would do better to look into carbon pricing instead of taxation. It directly works towards market pricing to assist in reducing emissions rather than a tax, which won't bring about progress in a cleaner environment, but rather more government interference. I don't know about that.
Well, it's government interference to try to tax you out of using it. We've proven that didn't help with the cigarettes.
Right.
I mean, now cigarettes, they used to be, you know, a quarter a pack. No matter how much you put, these people are addicted, and it doesn't help. All it does is hurt the people who can afford it the least. You think somebody who can afford a $1 million Bugatti is going to worry about any kind of carbon tax? They don't care. They get in their private jet and pollute the atmosphere. This hurts the people, and it is interference. Anytime the government begins to regulate anything, it's interfering. And it always ends up with you paying something out of your pocket. It's crazy. So I'm disappointed in the lack of perspective on people who still believe that, as I said, that putting things like a gas tax or any kind of tax,
which is what he wants to do right now, which the governor wants to do.
Yeah.
He wants us to join the Total Climate Initiative,
yeah,
which New Hampshire and I believe Vermont said no.
yeah.
I don't know about Rhode Island.
Yeah,
but
because
that
they'll
will
lynch them up there. Massachusetts is like bizarro world.
Yeah,
So.
and he wants to add an additional fee or tax onto gasoline of between 5 and 17 cents a gallon, because he figures that if he cranks the tax up a little bit on that, people will cut down on the amount that they drive. No, it won't. Massachusetts is not a public transit state. Boston is a public transit area because they have the T. And who pays for the T? You and I do, even though we don't get to use it.
That's right. But, see, that's the irony. How many times have we said it already on the show? Nobody drives into that traffic because they want to.
That's right.
They have to. And, you know, we can say that we use public. Look, the United States is 100 years behind public transportation. Europe, you know, the Orient Express, the trains, the bus systems, the subway systems, they use bicycles, they drive mopeds rather than cars. Why? Why? Because gas has been so expensive in those countries for years. They had to spend money and develop it, but that takes decades. It'll take a half a century or a century of putting in more money and more taxes into our transit systems, because these things evolved in Europe. And it was easier in Europe because the average income of the people in Europe is nowhere near what it is in the United States. So those people never really use their cars a lot in Europe, even in the old days, except on a weekend or to go visit their relatives, because it was too damn expensive, it was too cumbersome. And you know, this is, again, politicians with too much time on their hands figuring out how they can dump more taxes on us and justify it by saying they're doing good. Cigarette taxes have resulted in what? More money going to the state because of the cigarette taxes. Has it put a major dent in cigarette smoking with all the programs when we look at money spent versus... No. They came out with cheaper cigarettes. They come out with black market cigarettes. They roll their own. They sell them on a black market. You know, gasoline, you really believe that people who have to drive to Boston every day do it voluntarily? And even our solutions are ridiculous. Oh, we're getting rail to Fall River. Oh, yeah, there goes all the problems getting to Boston. I don't know a lot of people that want to take 2.5 hours to get to Boston one way. If you go to work, that adds 5 hours to your workday. So if you work 8 hours, that's 13 hours, plus the travel time to the T station, and if you can get a parking place at the T station, and the walk from your place of employment to the T station, and the wait for the train. So let's round it off at a nice 14 to 15 hours of your time to work an 8-hour day. So when you get home, you'll have about an hour to do everything you need to do if you want to get to bed and get a solid 8 hours. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It does. Really makes a lot of sense. These people, too much time on their hands, they sit on their brains for the most part. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you look at this stuff, and if you look at it like a person with a logical thought process, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. 2.5-hour trip, if it doesn't break down, which it does virtually every other day.
All the time, yeah, exactly. It's always breaking down. And, you know, the bigger problem that you have here is, you know, if you speak against this, they say, oh, you're one of those people that believes climate change is not, you know, is not happening and has nothing to do with, you know, fossil fuels, et cetera, et cetera. And if you come out for it, again, you get the pushback that, you know, you're all for higher taxes and, you know, things that aren't going to make this happen. No, what's going to make this happen is people have to make a change in their lifestyle. Because remember, if these fees or taxes or whatever the heck they want to call them are implemented, it's going to affect you. Because even in the article from the state senator, Marc Pacheco, he wants to put that on your homes. So if you use fossil fuels in your home to heat your home, you're out of luck, baby. If you're using natural gas, you're out of luck. You're going to have fees attached to it. And we already see those fees attached in our electric bills for solar energy and for these other alternate energy sources. We see those fees on those bills. Yeah. So we're paying for them, and we're really not getting any benefit. Are we? I don't know.
No. Because, look, let's face it, people are resistant to change in the first place. Secondly, we've seen how effective all these programs are. Do we remember all the smoking cessation programs we had at every place in the world had smoking cessation plans? How effective were they? Virtually not. Zero. Here's your drug, here's your brain on drugs. All the programs, again, now we've gotten to the point where we capitulated and just said, well, the hell with it. You know, we're just going to give them the drugs. And we only got a little while to go, but I wanted to hit this one too. Floor of Mayor Talk's biggest challenges. We had the treasurer resign, and they said, Sahadi said Ian Shackney. Isn't there a Dr. Shackney?
Yeah, I think so.
Must be a relative.
Yep.
As the city collector will technically take over the duties. He said, and this is a quote from the mayor, we have good people who know how to work, and we're going to count on them, unquote. Well, we do have a lot of good people. We also got a lot of people that have been making mistakes for 20 or 30 years and is still there. And those are the people you're counting as good people. It may be a tactical error. So you all know who I'm referring to. So stay angry, everybody, and remember, no new taxes, no old taxes, no taxes at all. Anybody that's for taxes is one and done.
For some reason, our closing music is not playing.
Well,
there it is.
Don't forget, watch the results of the Iowa caucus. Will Bernie prevail? And if Bernie prevails, will the Democratic Party do what they did with Hillary, and
at
to
the last
basically at
election,
the end say, we don't care if you people want to be Democrats and think you're part of the process. The Democratic Party runs this.
Hey, stay angry, people, and we'll see you on Wednesday.